I'm
Okay.
ready.
So it's a great pleasure to introduce to you Rachel Barenbaum. And I guess we've known each other for about 3.5 years. And before I actually introduce you and your second novel, I want to just tell the participants that you were so extraordinary because Rachel was planning to come to California in just at the moment when COVID hit. And I remember you were planning to come here in, I think it was March 2021. Is that right? And I think I had to write you and say, because of COVID, we're going to have to cancel your visit. And that was the first time I'd ever canceled any of these events. And I remember how wonderful you were, saying, well, please invite me again. And so we did. And you were the very first Zoom webinar we did 2 years ago, just after the publication of your first novel, which I have here, A Bend in the Stars, which is an extraordinary novel, extraordinary first novel. So let me just say a word or two about Rachel. This first novel of hers, A Bend in the Stars, received a prize in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the New York Journal of Books, and was a Boston Globe bestseller and Barnes and Noble Great New Writers selection. Rachel writes for the Los Angeles Review of Books and Dead Darlings, and the Tel Aviv Review of Books. And she has her undergraduate degree at Harvard College in business and literature and philosophy. And I should tell people that you had a preceding life before you were a novelist, and that was as a hedge fund manager, which is just stunning. I mean, whenever I think of that about you. She also has an honorary research associateship at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute at Brandeis University. And I always like to look at blurbs on the back cover of books. And so I noticed that Laura Prescott, who is a New York Times bestselling author of the book, The Secrets We Kept, she writes about Atomic Anna, epic, ambitious, and gripping, a wildly inventive novel that teems with life and grapples with the big questions of science, art, love, and humanity. That's quite amazing. Put all of that together in a single novel. So, Rachel, welcome again to the Taubman Symposium. And I'm dying to listen to you talk about Atomic Anna. So go ahead.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out in your lunch breaks or whatever you're doing in your day-to-day to listen to me and to hear about Atomic Anna. Feeling a little bit of pressure after that intro to make my Atomic Anna book talk as good as A Bend in the Stars, especially since it seems that some of you have read those books and listened to me before. But so hopefully I'll live up to it. But thank you again so much for having me. I do wish I could be there in person, but this is definitely the next best thing. So I'm really excited to talk to you about Atomic Anna. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can pop into the presentation. So hold on, let's just get this. A little bit of delay. Okay, there we go. So hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. Atomic Anna is my second book. You can see it here. Actually, this is the hardback cover and the paperback cover. Paperback is coming out on March 7th. So just about 1 month from now. I'm very, very excited. So I'm just going to go through this talk, assuming that most of you have not read the book yet, which is great because you can still go out and buy a copy and read it soon. So here we go. Atomic Anna follows 3 generations of women, grandmother, mother, and daughter, as they build a time machine to stop the Chernobyl disaster and save their family. So that's the one-liner sort of elevator pitch for the book. But really, it's about love, it's about family, it's about relationships between mothers and daughters, and it's about regret. It's a time travel novel, but all time travel is really philosophical. I studied philosophy and literature as an undergrad. That's where my brain lives, right? And it's about regret. And can we go back? Can we change things? Of course, we can't, but Atomic Anna challenges that and says, what if we could go back? Should we? Should we even do that if we had that power? And if we could, what would we change? Pretty obsessed with those topics. You're going to hear me talk about that a lot over the next half hour or so. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and then we'll get to them, as we move on, as we get to the end of this, and very excited to answer all of your questions. So Chernobyl, right? It was a horrific, horrific accident. And why do I start there? The book itself opens with Chernobyl, and I'm just going to read the very first opening paragraph so you get a sense of how the book opens. So April 26th, 1986, in the Soviet Union, the scientist, Anna Barkova, was asleep in her narrow bed in Pripyat, the closed city that housed workers from Chernobyl. She was cold, but then again, she was always cold. The walls in her building were thin, damp, and wind clawed through cracks, and she huddled under blankets to escape them. She'd fallen asleep, working on the amplifier she hoped would increase efficiency at the nuclear power plant, the prototype lying on her chest. It was small and crude, a circuit board covered with diodes and capacitors. She didn't hear the explosion or feel the catastrophic shudder as reactor number 4 ripped apart, its insides flayed, releasing the most dangerous substances known to man. Nor did she witness the shock of light that stabbed the dark, because at that exact moment, Anna tore through time. It was her first jump, and it was an accident. So that's how the book opens, right? We have Anna's very first time jump, and you already know that she's an engineer. She's one of the Soviet Union's top scientists, and she lands on a mountaintop in, what is present-day Armenia, Mount Ararat, and she finds her estranged daughter, Molly, dying, and she's confronted with the question, can she go back? If she can go back in time, if she can re-engineer, figure out what brought her forward, should she save Molly, or should she stop Chernobyl? Should she save the one singular, right, her daughter, or the many? This is a very Jewish, philosophical dilemma. It's something we hear about, talk about a lot throughout history in many of our texts. And the book itself is framed using Pirkei Avot. And so I actually start off saying Pirkei Avot, meaning chapters of the fathers, is a collection of Jewish ethical teachings and stories passed down from generation to generation. It begins with a warning, be patient in judgment. And I start with that because, when Anna is faced with this dilemma, should she go back and save her daughter or stop Chernobyl and save thousands, maybe millions of people down the line? Seems like there's an obvious answer, but I put forward that maybe it's so much harder than that. And yes, it may be obvious what the right thing to do is, but when you are holding your child, when she is dying in your arms, it is not easy. You must be patient in judgment, and be patient with yourself. So why Chernobyl? Why am I obsessed with these questions and this area and the Soviet Union? Some of you might remember from Bend in the Stars that my great aunts that I grew up with came over from Russia. My own grandmother, their sister, died when I was very young, and they stepped in and took her place, and they were at my house all the time. They were, basically my grandmothers. And on Friday nights, they used to call me over. I was the oldest, and they would say, Rachel, come over. And I would go over, and I really loved them, although they were also a little bit scary because they were, they smelled like herring and Manischewitz, and I loved everything about them, but they were a little scary. And they would say to me, Rachel, do you know where the passports are and the emergency money? And I would say, yes. They'd say, good. Well, you had to run from Russia. You might have to run one day. And that has always been with me. And I was sitting with these two great aunts watching the news the night that Chernobyl melted down, that it was reported in the US. And I have this in my head, right? Where are the passports? Where's the emergency money? Be ready to run. And these two great aunts, we sit down to watch the news. And this was back in the day when I had to show up, at 6 o'clock for the 6 o'clock news. And we were in Philadelphia, turn it to channel 6. That's what they like to watch. I had to adjust the antenna. You probably remember these days, right? And I sat down between the two of them, like sandwiched on this tiny little couch. And they're saying, they need to run, get out of Chernobyl, get out of Chernobyl. And then the one aunt leans over and she says to her sister, she says, if a woman had been in charge, that never would have happened. And so I have these women in my head, and I'm thinking, what if a woman had been in charge at Chernobyl? What if that woman had been Anna Burkova, right? And I create this whole character who's in charge of Chernobyl, of the Soviet facility, and I sort of build the world up from there. And that's how we get to Atomic Anna. That's how I sort of started and make the leap. So as I was digging into Chernobyl, how did I go from that little seedling of an idea, right? What if a woman was in charge, to an entire novel with time travel and spanning the generations? So I started doing my research. And in 2016, a whole bunch of photos came out from Pripyat, which is the closed city I mentioned in the very opening page of the book that I read. This is where all of the workers who worked at Chernobyl lived. It was built specifically to be their home. And it was built as a sort of model city, a site that the rest of the Soviet Union could, model other towns on, other cities. And I have no idea why, but the Soviet Union has hours and hours of footage, of video footage from Pripyat. It was like someone planted a camera in all different parts of the city, and then it just was on record for hours. And so I've seen hours of footage. It was a very idyllic city. It was very new. An entire generation had never even aged through Pripyat. So when you look at these videos, everyone was young and vibrant, and there are tons of kids, lots of newlyweds, lots of sort of love in the air. There are these new families and hope, and we are going to change the world. This is the ideal Soviet communist dream, right? Pripyat. And I saw lots of pictures of the pool, right, and swimming. And then I found this picture in 2016. And this was just the haunted pool. I can't tell you why, but this picture above all of the others just grabbed on and held on to me, that this is what happened to that dream. And very importantly, in the background, you see the clock, and it's stopped. And if any of you are swimmers, you know that when you're swimming, that clock is everything, right? If you worked out with a coach, go on the 20s, go on the 30s, every 5, someone pushes off, whatever it is, that clock dominates your life while you're at practice or while you're in that pool and you're doing your laps, and it is stopped. And for me, that just, it just stuck with me that the time stopped in Pripyat at Chernobyl. And so many horrific things came after that I had to dig in further to the story. So why time in particular? Why does that haunt me or obsess me? Why do I love it so much? I've talked a little bit about this in relation to Bend in the Stars. So this might be a reminder for some of you, or a little refresher on why time is so important, and why I love the question of what is time. So I also adore this photo. If you look at it in the background there, you see Albert Einstein. He very famously was not able to get a job after he graduated and got his degree. People thought he was crazy, unorganized, called him that crazy Jew, right? The anti-Semitic way of talking about him. Some people thought he was a genius, but he couldn't get a job anywhere. And he had a friend who famously helped him get a job at the patent examiner's office. And while he was there, he was looking at machines that would be used to synchronize clocks. So we were just on the verge, right, in 1914 of needing international schedules. So you could take planes and trains and, drive, whatever. You needed to be able to synchronize clocks from one city to another, one country to another, so that you could have meetings and schedules. But there was no system for synchronizing clocks yet. So Einstein very famously was working on these machines, helping people, right? Examining the patents, trying to figure out ways to come up with ways to synchronize clocks. And so he shows up to work every day asking, what is time? What is time? And eventually he gets to general relativity and light, and he takes us there and all these brilliant ideas, but he has all these thought experiments along the way. And he really starts in that philosophy of what is time? Why do we talk about killing time, spending time, right? Time is the center of our life. And it's important. It's what got us all here today, right? Right now, so that we could talk about atomic Anna. What is time? I've been obsessed with this question since I showed up to one of my first philosophy classes as an undergrad. And the professor walks in and says, what is time? And at first, when I heard this question, I thought, this is ridiculous. Minutes, hours, seconds. And she says, no, time is made up, entirely made up. Seconds, minutes, hours does not exist for the moon, for anything else in the universe, right? Just for us. And since then, I have been obsessed and really digging into Einstein, right, from the philosophical side, and these questions of what is time? Why does it matter? And really, he gets to this whole theory of time is relative and all sorts of explanations for that. But all of this is a long way of saying it gets me to thinking about time travel, which is what you see in Atomic Anna. It's questions of why does time matter? If you need to time travel, you first have to ask, all right, so we're going forward, right? And the order, the sequence of events is important. But what if we could jumble that up? What if we could change our view of time or recognize that different people experience time differently because of where they are, gravity, these kinds of questions. So this is where I approach time travel, or how I approach time travel in Atomic Anna. And I'm a little obsessed with time. And so we can talk about it more if you have questions. We can bring that up later. But all of this brings me to that first scene where Anna Barkova opens up, right? She's working on her amplifier and the book opens and she is transported through time to this mountaintop. So I'm just going to read a little section to where Anna opens her eyes. So here we go. So she's transported through time. Remember that I read it was her first jump and it was an accident. So she opens her eyes and this is where she is. She spotted a building in the distance. Smoke stained the sky above, leaking from the chimney. If she could get to that building, inside she'd be safer. She slipped and clawed her way to her feet and forced herself forward. The building was narrow and long, built with stone. As she stumbled toward it, she passed a spot in the snow that bloomed red with fresh blood trailing in a long line. Her panic grew. Perhaps the KGB had left her there. It was no secret Gorbachev detested her. Her safety protocols were expensive and slowed production, but without Anna and those protocols, there would be no RBMK reactors, and those reactors were Gorbachev's pride. He wouldn't kill her, she assured herself. Besides, if he did, it wouldn't be like this. It would be with a bullet. This was too elaborate. The front door wasn't locked. Just before she opened it, there was a flash. After that, the pain in her head was gone. Relief. She barreled through the entrance, aware of heat as it rolled over her like a wave. She spilled onto a bench. A black parka hung next to her. She put it on, and slowly her body warmed. So I described the complex more and more, and I wanted to show this picture that you're looking at right now, because this is what I based that complex on, where Anna finds herself. As I mentioned, this is on Mount Aragats in present-day Armenia. And I was reading actually the New York Times one day, and I saw this essay on a real-life Soviet cosmic ray station. And I thought, what? That can't be real. So I dug into it and I started researching, and I found tons of photos and photo essays taken by Toby Smith in National Geographic, The Guardian. And then there were other photos, not by him, but other ones in the New York Times special. And I just thought, oh my God, if someone is going to build a time machine and be transported through time, they've got to end up at a cosmic ray station. Like, I couldn't even make something up that was better than that. So a big chunk of the novel happens here. on Mount Aragats at this station. So obviously I changed things a little bit. I describe it according to my imagination, but this is really the station that Anna and her daughter, you know, where they are. This is where all the action happens. And I just love showing this photo because it's real. This is a real place, right? The old Soviet cosmic ray station, and it really is still inhabited by, I think, just one or two people are up there taking care of the old equipment and what's there. So I just love this picture. So there are, as I mentioned briefly, 3 generations of women in this book. The first generation is Anna herself, and then the second generation is her daughter, Molly. So I'm not giving away spoilers, I promise, because in all the promo materials, you can read about this. But Molly, as I said, is Anna's daughter, and Anna gives her away. She puts her, sends her off to America with her best friend, Yulia, and Yulia's husband, to give Molly a better life. And because Anna is questioning her own role as a mother, does she want to be a mother? Is motherhood for her? These are some of the big questions in the book. What does it mean to be a mother? And just because you're a woman or you're married, does it mean that you have to be one? Yulia desperately wanted to be a mother, was thrilled to take Molly, and Anna was more ambivalent. She really didn't want to be a mother. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't, but not like Yulia. And she wanted her daughter to have a better life. So Molly goes to America, and she is raised in America, and she falls into comic books. And why comic books? So the whole middle generation and the, sort of 1/3 of the book, a chunk, is about Molly and her life. And, as she tries to become a comic book artist. This part of the novel is inspired by, again, a true life, amazing, amazing woman named Trina Robbins, who really pushed to modernize women in comics. So back in the heyday of the East Village Other, the EVO, Trina Robbins was pushing to pull women out of refrigerators. So comic books up until that time literally portrayed women as being thrown into refrigerators. I'm not making that up. They were thrown into refrigerators. I think that trope started with a Green Lantern and was just continued. And usually they were thrown into refrigerators after fighting over men, or they were saved by a man or waiting to be saved by a man. And Trina Robbins stands up in the heyday of fighting for, abortion rights, women to have bank accounts and be able to get mortgages on their own, women's lib, second wave of feminism. And she says, let's change that and let's make strong women in comics who work together and are no longer in refrigerators. And I just thought that was amazing. And I wanted to capture that moment. Sadly, of course, the right to choose is now in question. I don't know how you want to say that, with Roe versus Wade being torn down. Sadly, we still see the women in this moment in my book, and we see them fighting very hard for these rights. So I wanted to read the paragraph here where Molly falls in love with comic books for the first time. So let me just pull that up. Here we go. So this is Molly as a young girl discovering comic books. When her tears were gone, she looked up at the webbed cracks in the ceiling, 100 lines crooked across the old plaster, and she remembered the comic books from the baker. Molly pulled her flashlight out from under the corner of her mattress and began reading. Mary and her twin brother, Captain Marvel, were separated at birth. At the age of 12, they were reunited, and Mary realized her superpowers. While both used the same word, Shazam, to invoke these powers, her brother's powers came from Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury, Shazam, while Mary's came from Selena, Hippolyta, Ariadne, Zephyrus, Aurora, and Minerva. A comic book with a powerful girl at the center and all kinds of superhero adventures took her mind off the anger. Molly read page after page after page. So there I talk a little bit about how she's introduced to this idea of strong women and women in comics. But Molly has a really hard life. As we find out later, she is an addict. She falls to alcohol and drugs. In the middle, her comics change. She goes from comics that she was drawing as a younger girl to a more sophisticated style, a darker style. I talk about that a lot in the book. And really, addiction becomes another key point in the book. And I just wanted to read a paragraph as we see Molly's life veering on to that alternate course. So she thought, right, when she was a young girl that she could become a famous comic book artist, but then she made maybe not the best decisions. And don't we all sometimes regret our decisions? So Molly starts making these bad decisions, and here we see her making some of her first. So she falls for Victor. Molly and Victor started going out on weeknights as well as weekends. Molly was called into the principal's office because she was failing English and French. She convinced herself it didn't matter. She hadn't heard a word from EVO yet, but like Victor kept telling her, she would. She was sure she had a different future where high school didn't matter, where no one cared if she went to college anyway. It was May when Victor offered her a bump. They were at a club. He said it casually, as if he were offering her a glass of water instead of cocaine. The music was loud. She was wearing a new short skirt he'd bought for her, one she put on after she was out of the house. He was wearing his leather jacket, holding his arms out to block people from brushing against her. No pressure, he said. I just thought it would be a good time. Molly knew kids in her class were doing drugs, but didn't know what that meant. Were they smoking pot? Using needles? In health ed, the gym teacher showed films where kids overdosed, but it was his job to scare them. This was Victor, a man she trusted, saying it was no big deal. You've tried it? She asked. He nodded. It's not healthy, like your salmon and lettuce. He laughed. I do my calisthenics. I eat properly. A little vodka, a little cocaine, it's okay. He took her hand, led her into the men's bathroom, and showed her what to do. So there we see really Molly veering off course, and then her comics change. And the novel really, really takes us into this darker part of Molly's life, but always leading towards hope. I always write towards hope because I like to hold on to that. So one of the great projects that I got to do as a part of this, bringing this novel to life and to the world, was about 6 months before the novel was published. We have sort of, when it's put to bed, I have this quiet time while I'm waiting for reviews to come out, people like Richard to read it, tell me if they like it, if they want to invite me to come speak. And during this time, I decided that I wanted to find some women comic book artists to draw the comic books that I imagine and dream up in the novel, the ones that Molly makes. So her comic book series is called Atomic Anna. And I found through Mary Sue DeConnick, who's this, amazing current day, Kelly Sue DeConnick, sorry, Mary Sue is a publication. Anyway, but through her, I found this amazing group of women who were writing comic books and or drawing comic books. And I got 2 women to go ahead and draw these for me. This was amazing. So this is the early comics that I described that Molly starts drawing when she's younger. And so her 3 main characters are Rocket Raissa, Mighty Minerva, and Atomic Anna. And she draws them, and let's see, did I mark that off? No, I did not. But anyway, so these are the 3 comic book heroes that I describe in the book that Molly is drawing. They're a little bit animated for just a second. And then she grows up and the comic books change and Molly falls for Victor, right? And there are other men in Anna's life and Raissa's life. Once Molly is up on the mountain with her mom at Mount Aragats, she starts hearing about these other men and adventures and her comics change. And so you see that in these pictures. And I had this great social media campaign going on. It was so much fun where I got to put out these comics and these, the pictures that these women were drawing for me. And so here we see Daniel and Yasha also portrayed and an older version of Rocket Raissa. And then these are the comic book covers that came together in the end. And I just love them. There's Angela Wu, of course, did this one. You can see over here. And then Emily Reed did the other. And it was super fun. And then in the middle, you see a version that we didn't go with. But you see, right, this is what Molly's envisioning. And these comic books are what Anna uses. She travels through time and drops them off for Raissa, her granddaughter. So Molly has a daughter because Raissa, the 3rd generation in the book, is a math genius. And Anna realizes that she needs her granddaughter's help to really perfect her time machine. It's not working exactly the way she needs it to work. It's killing her slowly. And it's not helping her accomplish what she needs to accomplish. So Molly ends up drawing these comic books and leaving them with little hints for Raisa to read and math equations for her to solve and basically help Anna as she gets older. So they play a big part in the book in that way. So now I'm going to talk about this third generation, the math prodigy, Raisa, who grew up in Philadelphia. Molly, because of the drugs and alcohol and her addiction, she grows up with her grandparents. Yulia again steps in and takes care of her and raises her. And she grows up in Northeast Philly. And I wanted to show these pictures because these pictures really sort of capture the neighborhood and the moment that Raisa is growing up in. And so you'll see at the top there's a picture of a flea market in Northeast Philly. Any of you who are from Philadelphia might know. I'm pretty sure it still exists. I grew up going to this flea market every Sunday, but this is what she sees. You see a couple of times in the book. She works at the Russian market, her grandparents' butcher shop, and you see that in the next picture. That's sort of an old-fashioned butcher shop that I imagine they grew up with. You see the salamis hanging everywhere. That's sort of the telltale sign. And then in the bottom, we actually have a picture of one of my favorite bands, Chaim. This is the front cover of one of their latest album, Women in Music Part 3, and it's taken at Cantor's in LA. So some of you guys might know that famous deli, but that look and feel is really what the Russian market was like that Raisa was growing up in. And I just love the hanging salamis. I grew up with those too. I needed to put that in there. So I'm going to read to you the opening when I introduce Raisa and you hear a little bit about her world. So each chapter begins with a time marking because it's a time travel book. We jump around a little bit. So this one is September 1987, and it's 5 years before Molly dies on Mount Ararat. So that's where we are in Philadelphia. When Raisa was 16 years old, she had been living with her grandparents for 6 years in a slice of Northeast Philly they called Little Russia. The streets were lined with row homes, separated by walls so thin there was no privacy, and invisible borders so thick she didn't need to use a word of English until she stepped into a classroom at school. She never saw her mother because she'd been told she was still in prison, and Raisa refused to visit. Papa was long dead, and now Raisa passed every waking hour, either at school or with her grandparents working at their store, the Russian market. She oscillated between the two worlds on a schedule set by the school bell and a pair of church bells recorded in Moscow that blared on the Russian radio station her grandmother played at all hours. Please, no more meat or broth. I need to leave, Raisa said to her babushka. She pushed the bowl away. She was due at a math competition in 2 hours, and if she didn't leave soon, she'd be late. They were seated in the kitchen at their formica table, so close together their knees knocked. The whole space was cramped like that. The refrigerator was flush with the stove, which nestled against a counter that in turn spilled into a sink only 1 plate wide. Babushka often complained she didn't have room to breathe while she cooked, but Raisa liked the lack of space, knowing her grandmother was close. It was the only thing that helped her calm down, and she needed that. She'd always been nervous. Her whole life, she was sure something bad would happen. Call it a premonition or just an anxious disposition, but it had also proven to be true. She'd already lost both her parents and didn't have any other family in America. The fact was, if Raisa lost her grandparents, she would have no one, and so she needed to be as close to them as she could. So that's how we first meet Raisa, and you'll see in that scene, she has her first comic book sighting and finding a little bit later in that chapter. So that about wraps things up. Yep, so I'm gonna stop sharing now. And I just want to show you behind me, oops, I'm gonna lean this way, backwards, right? I have this picture, and if you can see this, I should have put this in the presentation. This is actually a picture from inside of Mount Ararat in the Cosmic Ray Station. These are the computers that Anna would have been using and that are still up there now. So this is the computer system being used at the Cosmic Ray Station at these little sort of treehouse research centers, as I call them and as I describe them in the book. So if you have any questions or comments, or you want to ask anything about writing or the book, now is the time. Please put your questions in the Q&A or send them out into the ether so we can talk about them.
there's one comment that was made earlier, and I want to introduce you to someone by the name of Stephen Stone, who is one of my longtime colleagues and friends here in Santa Barbara. We've known each other probably for 40 years or more. And Stephen he sort of takes the responsibility of organizing a book group in our local Reformed Congregation B'nai B'rith. And he writes, the Congregation B'nai B'rith Jewish Book Club loved A Bend in the Stars. And then there are 4 exclamation marks. I remember they read it that year. So please, if there are any questions, I hope that some of you are thinking about a career in writing. And I hope you'll look at Rachel Barenbaum as a wonderful example of someone whose career started one way, but now she is a very successful writer. I mean, it's really quite amazing, your career trajectory. So we have another comment, and this is from, I think, one of my undergraduate students who writes, I would love to purchase a book, I assume your book, but I am limited on funds. I'm wondering if your book is usually available in libraries as well.
Yes. So, Stephen, thank you so much first for reading Bend in the Stars and bringing it to the book club. Thank you. That makes my day. I hope you guys will read Atomic Anna also and love it just as much. And Evan, yes, it should be in your library. It's everywhere books are sold. It's in libraries across the country. If they don't have it, you should talk to your librarian and request it, and they should buy it for you. And if they don't, contact me, and I will help you get a copy. I feel like everyone should be able to read every book they can possibly want to read, and I'm more than happy to help anyone get a copy of Atomic Anna.
And Evan, if I can just add something to Rachel's comment, I'll be happy to purchase a paperback version for you. You said it's coming out in March?
March 7th.
March 7th. So we'll still be in classes. And Evan, if you are in my class, I'm going to buy you a copy of Atomic Anna.
I love it. Thank you. I love that, right? No one should be denied a book ever. But I also wanted to say, Richard, I thank you so much for noting that I had a career as a hedge fund manager first. I have been writing novels forever. It's not something that was new that I suddenly picked up. I just couldn't afford to write full time when I graduated. And, all writers struggle with that. You don't make a ton of money, especially, on your first advance or whatever, the first time you're trying to write. And so I had to work a whole other job and to pay down my loans and everything like that. I don't know, some of you are listening who are still students, but just keep writing, right? You just keep writing every night. And I think the more you keep trying, the more you will learn and keep reading. And so, yes, it took me a long time to finally get a book published and to get out of finance, but just don't give up. Just keep going.
So we have a response to Evan's question about libraries. The book is available through our library on campus's interlibrary loan program, which is not every campus buys every book. But I'm buying you one, Evan, if you want to wait until March 7th. And then Aaron Zvidu writes, was Mount Ararat a deliberate choice for the site where Anna ends up? I understand that there are religious, spiritual connections to that site, one of which is that it is considered by some to be the site of Noah's Ark.
Yeah, so I think that there are 2 mountains. There's Ararat and Aragat with a G. So it is a different site. So yes, and Mount Ararat is believed to be holy in the site of Noah's Ark and stuff. And Armenia is a beautiful country. I would love to be able to go and see them all one day. But yeah, this cosmic ray station is up there on Mount Aragat. You can go see it. It's crazy.
one of our colleagues writes, I've read both and love both, especially
Thanks.
Atomic Anna. I currently have the Goleta library version checked out. I'm curious how you get the physics material, for example, unifying gravity and the other forces.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading both and for loving science in novels. I love to put them in there, science into novels, because science really starts with big questions, right? What is time? What is time travel? Why does it matter? I was actually speaking to a physicist. I have a podcast. She came onto my show, Chanda Prescott-Weinstein, who was saying, in scientists in a program she was involved with, they were working on satellites or images to do, sort of long distance photography of planets and things. And this sounds like an amazing project and research, project to take on, except that they got all this funding, and then those satellites and cameras were turned around to do policing, right? So you can look out at universes and it's very idyllic, but then when it's turned around and used against people, then scientists are left thinking, should I have done that? Should I have enabled that kind of science? And so these are really the questions that I wanted to get at, and which is why I use Pirkei Avot as the frame for this novel, because they're questions. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. Can something be used in other nefarious ways that you might not want it to be used as? And if that is the case, should you even be doing it? Can you prevent someone from doing it? These are big questions without answers, but that I think we should all be thinking through before we set out, on these big scientific endeavors. So I do a lot of science reading because I love it, because I love these big questions. And I think you can't stop progress. You can't stop technology, right? ChatGPT is a great example of that. So if we can't stop it and it's there, what are we going to do with it? How do we use it responsibly? And how far should we take it? So I think these are the big questions that I love to talk about. And that's why I put them in there. It's, what I want to read about and talk about. So that's why I end up writing about it.
Another participant writes the question that I wish I could have written to you, and that is, how you put together this extraordinary narrative of time jumps. And so this participant writes, did you write Atomic Anna chronologically, or did you piece together different ideas and characters as they came to you?
I love this question, especially for a time travel book, because the answer is all of it. I wrote some of it chronologically and sequentially as the scenes came. Sometimes I would have to go back and do it just as the Anna section, just as the Molly section, right? Just concentrate on the one character. Sometimes I had to go through, just by location sections even, make sure they were all consistent. So it got very complicated, but by doing it in all different ways and from all different angles, it came together. And one of the things that I love to point out also is that I actually wrote one of the very last scenes was the very first ones that I wrote. And so it starts out with, it's the scene where Anna goes back in time and finds her mother. And it's the day her own mother is lost. And that was the very first scene that I wrote, because I thought that this whole book was going to be about Xenia and Anna and Xenia's story. But then I found myself rushing to get to Chernobyl, and I'm 115 pages into that draft and bored, and I want to jump forward. And that's when I realized I wasn't at the beginning, that really I just needed to start at Chernobyl.
There's another interesting question that asks, you just get it. Well, Skona, who asked the question about where you get the scientific materials for your novels, writes, to clarify my question, I get the big philosophical picture. I'm just curious whether you consult physicists for the details.
I love that. By the way, you guys are asking amazing questions. Thank you so much. I love it. It's a writer's dream. It is this writer's dream to have people listening and reading so carefully. So thank you. Yes, I talk to physicists. Yes, I sit down because, I didn't study physics. And when you want to have a convincing character in your book, you need to use the language, the tone, the examples that someone like that character would use. And they don't come to me naturally. So I have sat down with physicists, to hear how they talk, how they see the world, right? Just as I say in the book at one point, that Molly sees the world as the juxtapositions of, black and white, of color. A physicist or Raisa might see math and equations, and a physicist might see shapes in a different way, right? Or curvature, however they think of, right, depending on what type of physics. So yes, I spend time with them and reading physics written by physicists to sort of embody that language or define to get it into the text.
There's another very interesting question that's asked. I really want to get this. Because in your presentation, you spoke about the picture of the pool.
Yeah.
And the haunting picture. And so this anonymous attendee writes, is there a good place to see more of the pictures featured in your presentation? And I assume that they're really asking about Chernobyl and the workers' city.
Yeah, Pripyat is the closed city.
Pripyat.
Yes, you can find those photos anywhere with any Google search. They come up. If you use Canva, you can also eerily, if you search Chernobyl, a lot of them come up there too. But there were a lot of photo essays that came out in 2016 with all sorts of pictures. There was an amusement park, so there's like a haunted Ferris wheel. You can see a haunted playground, just all sorts of these, like you see a child's toy that's obviously old and, fallen over. You can see all of these pictures.
Yeah. There's one picture that I remember, much like the pool, that is so central to you in that time and the clock. It's the picture of the child's tricycle rusting away on a sidewalk near a road or a street that is being overrun by various kinds of weeds and roots of various kinds. Another question.
I just want to add before we move on, if you're interested, if you're interested in that video footage from the Soviet Union of Pripyat sort of in its prime, I think you can also Google that, and there are just hours and hours of that footage that is available to the public.
There's literally been an explosion of comments here. So you remember I mentioned Stephen Stone, my friend and colleague. So he writes, transcending time is a literary device that is used and abused. It is hard to pull off without creating a discordant plot. How do you outline your characters and plot to make your writing easily coherent to the reader? Also, I love the romantic comedy that used time travel as a device that proved to have a moral about time from a film in 2023. I think that you would love it too. Maybe you know the film.
I do, and I love it. I pretty much love every time travel movie. You can't do time travel without, morality in there. Why, or regret? Why are you time traveling, and should you be doing it? What else are you going to change? So I always love to see how that's approached and addressed in every time travel book or movie. Yeah. So how do I outline my characters and plot to make them coherent? It's very hard is the answer. And I use a very extensive spreadsheet and, very clearly mark if one thing changes, right? If in this time jump, a character gets a tattoo or something, they don't in this book, but whatever it is, if they change their hair color or anything like that, that has to be consistent after that point. So I just have very extensive notes about what is happening in each section and what has changed. And it's very hard. I mean, I loved it. But it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of note checking.
So Stephen comes back with he says, clarifying my question, how do you physically outline your draft? A wall chart, a computer outline, index cards, triple question mark.
I use a spreadsheet. I use Excel. And because I love Excel because you can toggle it. So like I was saying, I could move the timeline to chronological or by character, right? Because you can arrange all of your rows or, your columns according to those traits. And then you can move it around easily to make sure that everything is lining up.
So we're coming to the end of our time with you. And I want to make sure I get my question in. And then there's another very, very important question that we might end with. But my question is, you write about Russia, but really it's about the Ukraine, isn't it?
It is. It's a good question.
Yeah. So what do you think as a writer who has, explored Ukrainian Jews and the Ukrainian landscape in the past year with this horrible war going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's horrific what's happening in Ukraine right now. From my family historical perspective, they were Jews in Ukraine, in Russia. They experienced anti-Semitism from both Ukrainians, right, or the Russians. And at the time that this happens, we're in the Soviet Union, and that part is part of the Soviet Union. So I had this issue with A Bend in the Stars also. What do you call this land area? Because it has changed names and rulers so many times. So I go by the name according to that moment in time. So it's Soviet for Atomic Anna. When Anna's family is there, it is Russian, and when I told you that first chapter I wrote that ended up being one of the last ones. So it wasn't Ukraine then. So that's sort of how I deal with it in the books. And then in terms of the relevance to today, it's terrifying. It was terrifying to hear that Russian soldiers were marching through Chernobyl, that there was no protection, that they were exposed to all the radiation. I do have friends from Ukraine now. Actually, one of them helped me with some of my questions from about when I was writing Atomic Anna. And it's so sad to see what is happening and to see that, back in the news.
So before I go to this last question, I really had two questions to ask you. So I want to ask the second question, and then we're going to go to this last question, which is really, really important. It's a really existential question. So
Okay.
my second question, which is really about, of course, you said you've been a writer all your life. Mm-hmm. And so what are you working on now? What's your third novel?
Yes. So I am a scholar in residence at Brandeis right now at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute, and working on a book that is set in Russia in 1880s Russia, right? That's what it was called then. And it is the story of 4 real life women who worked together to assassinate the Tsar. And they were successful. And they worked with men on this assassination attempt, but they all became footnotes, and the men were sort of the stars. So I'm writing a book to bring their roles forward. Okay,
so here is this last existential question.
Here's the big one. All right, I'm ready.
And this is from an individual by the name of Krishan Lal, who writes, this was an awesome event listening, and thanks for sharing this with us. But I have one question. As someone who started their career life in finance, what was really your inspiration or motivation to go into writing and fully pursue it?
I think that I was just looking at my life one night. I was supposed to be on an earnings call or reading some spreadsheets, and I just wanted to work on my query to get an agent. And I just sort of looked in the, metaphoric mirror at night and said, what do you want to do? Like 10 years from now, do you still want to be, working on queries whenever you can and trading stocks, or do you want to be a writer? Sort of did that soul searching, and I said, I just want to be a writer. And I made myself quit and close down everything. It sort of made the stakes a lot higher by doing it full time. And I think that maybe that extra push is what did it. It's easy. It's at first, when I first got out of college and I had to pay, down so many loans and everything, I had no question. I needed the money. I needed to go into finance. But after that, sort of easy to coast along on what you're doing for anybody. And it's always hard to quit and try something new. And I don't know, some existential moment hit me. I looked in the mirror and I said, it's time.
Okay. Well, Rachel, it's been a wonderful hour with you. And I'm so glad that we could have you on the 6th of February, 2023. And it's just been fascinating listening to this. And I've been wondering how you would describe this time travel. Because one of the things I think that really characterizes your work is your ability to control the narrative. And the way, there are different ways that you do it, but you're a master at controlling the narrative, which then allows you perhaps to do the time jumps and the time slips. So it was wonderful listening to you describe that and listening to this wonderful book, Atomic Anna. And we thank you very, very much for joining us this lunch. I called it a virtual lunch, but I forgot to get mine. So I'm sorry. Maybe some others enjoyed a virtual lunch with you, but thank you very, very much for coming to the Taubman Symposium today. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to listen, to watch, and for reading Atomic Anna. Thank you. I love it.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.